May 2021, Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. The drive from El Paso, Texas up to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico was a beautiful and thankfully uneventful drive. The campground was typical of the Southwest, just a piece of desert that you got a chance to park on. The campground did, however, have good water, good power, and good sewer, so that's about all I ever want anyway. Since our reservations for exploring the caverns aren't until later in the week, we decided to explore the Devil's Hall Trail in the Guadalupe Mountains. The Guadalupe Mountains, oddly enough, are back in Texas, so we drove clean up here from Texas to New Mexico, and now we're taking a day trip back to Texas to explore these trails. The most beautiful thing along these trails were these trees. We found a sign that said that this one is called a desert mahogany. This tree has beautiful red spirals and we really enjoyed looking at it. The Devil's Hall Trail was supposed to be a moderate trail and it's supposed to be about 5-mile round trip. Well, it might have started as a moderate trail, but it didn't take very long at all before I started to think that this was not such a moderate trail. As we went further and further into this canyon, the trail became way steeper than it did at the beginning of our hike. The trail turned into one wash after another. Climb down the side of a cliff to get into a dry wash, cross the dry wash, climb up the side of a cliff to get out of the dry wash and cross the next hill in line. Eventually, after a lot of up and downs and climbing over some good-sized rocks, the trail eventually took us down into a dry wash and it did not want us to come back out. Instead, it took us up the dry wash deeper into the canyon. Eventually, there was no more trail, and now it was time to just follow this dry old riverbed upstream as far as we possibly could, hopefully all the way up to the Devil's Hall. We've been in these riverbeds before, and we know what they're like. Big, huge boulders that you somehow have to maneuver. Several times on hikes up these dry rivers, we've encountered boulders and cliffs that were just way too much for us to do, and we ended up falling short of our goal, sometimes by just a couple of 100 yards. The further up the river we went, the bigger the boulders, and I was really starting to think that this was going to be another one of those hikes that we could not finish. And I'll tell you, it was more than once that we had to stop, look around, and try to figure out just how we're going to maneuver through this boulder field. But eventually, we made it to this point. And I'll tell you, it was at this point that I was almost certain that we had finally come to the end, because as I looked around, I could not see any way up from here. The direction we had to go was this way. About a 20-foot cliff, almost straight up. Well, it looked a little sketchy, but it looked doable, and it looked like we should be able to make it down as well, because, you know, that's really important. So, off I go, trying to figure out if this is as easy as it actually looked. And fortunately, it was not as bad as you first think it is when you look at this cliff. And once I looked around the corner and made sure there was not another cliff in front of us, it was Janet's turn. Janet had a different thought for a while about how she was going to make it up this cliff. But after careful review, she decided that maybe the way I went might have been the easiest way up. So off she went to the corner and started to climb up this cliff. Now for me, 20 feet is a long way, but for Janet, 20 feet's a little bit farther. But she made it without very much effort at all. And at the top of the climb, Janet was rewarded with a nice pool of water. For some reason, she didn't seem all that interested in it. Well, anyway, just a little bit more climbing and another couple of 100 yards, and we were going to be at the Devil's Hall point of this trail. The Devil's Hall turned out to be a very narrow canyon with lots of boulders all the way through it. We made our way all the way through the canyon, sat on the other side, and enjoyed the view from where we came. After a few minutes of rest so we can catch our breath, and a little water and a snack, it was time to make our way back down. Down is always a little bit harder than up. Again, in this case, gravity is not your friend. If you slip on the way down, you're very likely to tumble all the way to the bottom, and there's nothing but rocks along the way. So a little extra care is called for when making your way down some of these cliffs. Since you're watching this video, we obviously made it, but we were not yet done with our adventure for today. As we were hiking the Devil's Hall Trail, we met some people who told us about this place called Sitting Bull Falls. Sitting Bull Falls was supposed to be a waterfall located deep inside one of these canyons. Usually, waterfalls in Texas don't have water, they're just a cliff. So I was really surprised to find this oasis of water way out here in the middle of nowhere. This place didn't just have one waterfall, it had bunches of them all located inside this canyon, and all of them going to their own little crystal clear pools of water. I will tell you, from my point of view, this was the prettiest, most pleasant area that we have been since we got to Texas way back in January. We hiked all around these falls, looking at the plants, looking at the water, and it was just too bad that the water was so cold, or else I'll tell you, I would have jumped right into it. But we sat alongside the shores and just listened. What a wonderful, relaxing way to end the day before driving home. Hitting a deer was the least of our concerns while driving home. This is cattle country, and you have to say hello to Mr. Cow when you drive. But we're almost home, and tomorrow we're going to Carlsbad Caverns. Carlsbad Caverns. It's what we came up here to see. After all, this is the main point of our stop here. We made our required reservations several weeks back, so now we are ready to go and explore the caverns. Unlike other caverns that we've explored, there was no guide to take us through this one, so we were pretty much on our own. There's two ways to get into the cavern. You can take an elevator, or you can walk. We opted to walk. So it was 1.5 miles of ziggy-zaggies all the way down into this deep cave, 750 feet. But hey, it was all downhill, so no big deal. The deeper we went, the darker it got. And I'll tell you, at the beginning, the cave is impressive, but it's not spectacular. It's just a bunch of rocks and a dark cave. But as you went deeper and deeper into the cave, nearly at the bottom, you finally started seeing some of the formations that you find in only some of the more beautiful caves in the country. Once we made it all the way to the bottom, right next to the elevator shaft, it was time to take the 1.5 mile walk through the caverns themselves. And this is where the cave truly became a beautiful place to explore. Although this may not have been the most beautiful cave that we ever explored, that would have been Postojna in Slovenia, this one was the most beautiful that we explored in the United States. And I'll tell you, it's well worth seeing. Once we finally got out of the cave, we took a scenic drive through Carlsbad Caverns National Park. This drive was about 15 miles down a dirt road that took us across the ridges and down into the valleys between. Along the way, we took several stops just to take in the scenery. And of course, as we usually do, we always like to stop someplace, if at all we can, where we can have lunch with a view. And this drive made the perfect place for lunch with a view. Once we've taken the time for a nice, long, leisurely lunch, it was time to get back in the car and make our way back to the RV and cap off another wonderful day on the road. The next day, we decided to take a drive north of Carlsbad. There was supposed to be a state park up there right alongside a lake, and we kind of wanted to spend some time on the water again. As it turned out, the state park was closed, but we did find some little side roads that looked like they were going to take us down to the shore of the lake. So, having a four-wheel drive, we figured, why not? As it turned out, the roads did take us down to the lake, although they were not the most pleasant roads. The lake turned out to be a bit of a bust. Really, just desert running up to the shore of this lake, and the lake wasn't that pleasant. There was nothing on the beaches, no place to really put a chair, no shade, so we looked around and decided it was time to move on. Janet found that there was a city park down in Carlsbad that ran alongside the Pecos River, and it was supposed to be a really nice place to go ahead and visit. So, back we went on these horrid roads to make our way out to the main road and make our way down to Carlsbad and the city park. It took a little bit of time and effort on these bumpy roads, but eventually we did make it out of here and down to the city park, and the park did not disappoint. A nice river, beautiful green grass, nice trees, picnic tables, the perfect place for lunch with a view. And after lunch, it was time to go home because tomorrow we had McKittrick Canyon planned, and that was going to be a hike. We planned to hike to Pratt's Lodge, which was supposed to be about a 5-mile hike deep into McKittrick Canyon. This is supposed to be another one of those moderate hikes into the canyons of the desert. And since we've learned our lesson, we got there bright and early in the morning and set off before the sun got too high in the sky and the temperature got to be too hot. 2/3 of the way into the canyon, and this trail was still a moderate trail. I keep on waiting for the other shoe to drop. I mean, there's got to be boulders up here someplace, right? But anyway, the trees were still beautiful, and this was a pleasant walk. We were almost there when we went downhill to cross... Wait a minute. A stream? We actually had to cross a stream. You know what the difference between a stream and a river in Texas is? A stream has water. A river doesn't have any water in it at all. This was one of the few streams that we actually crossed. We're almost there, and this is still a moderate trail. I'm now convinced they're just trying to mess with me. We're there. We're at Pratt Lodge, and we're not tired. This is a beautiful little cabin built by the Pratt family. The cabin was built in the 1930s. Everything in here, including some of the material to build the cabin, was Structon. I looked at the maps, I looked at the trails, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out where the road was that they used to bring all this stuff in here. Well, the road may be long gone, but the view is still here. This is the view from the porch of Pratt Lodge. I gotta say, he picked a great place to build himself a little cabin, and I can imagine them relaxing on this porch and looking at the view from their nice little house in this canyon. So we're 5 miles in, we're not tired, and we know that another 1.5 miles further down this trail is a grotto. So we're thinking, why not? Let's go check out this grotto. And again, this is a moderate trail, and it's staying that way. I'm really having a hard time dealing with this because this is a pleasant, easy, comfortable walk. And after another mile and a half or so of making our way through the woods, yes, woods, way out here in the desert, we eventually made it to the grotto. As far as grottos goes, this one was not huge and it was not deep. But it was well worth the walk up here, and I don't regret making the extra mile and a half to get here and look at this place. While we were at the grotto, we were told that just a half a mile or so up the road is another cabin, and this one is called Hunter's Cabin. Well, why not? We've already committed to 8 miles of hiking. What's another mile just to see a cabin? So a half a mile later, there it was, Hunter's Cabin. So this cabin was nowhere near as nice as Pratt's Lodge, but still, it was a nice little cabin in a really nice location. After making it all the way up there, we took the time to explore the cabin and all the outbuildings around it before finally turning around and making our way back down to where we left our car. So it was getting a little later in the day than we expected, and we have about 4.5 to 5 miles that we have to walk to get there. But at least this time we know that the walk is along a moderate trail. It's not going to be that hard, so we're not overly concerned about making it. It's just a matter of taking the time and walking back. So as we walk back again, we're thinking, wow, we're in the Guadalupe Mountains. We're in Texas. We're supposed to be in New Mexico, but on this trip, other than Carlsbad Caverns, we've spent most of our time down here in Texas exploring the Guadalupe Mountains, and I would highly recommend it. The plan for the next day was back to the Guadalupe Mountains and the Frijole Ranch. But as we were driving in, we started noticing all that smoke up above the ranch. So, instead of hiking, what we met was the fire department at the gate to the park. As it turned out, the park was closed because of the fire. So although we couldn't go and explore the ranch, there was a stagecoach stop very close to the entrance to the park, and it was open. So off we went to explore this old stagecoach stop. The stop was worth seeing. There wasn't a lot left of it, just some old ruins and partially collapsed building, but still, it was nice to see, and it was something to do. And since we couldn't explore the ranch, we decided to go to Rattlesnake Springs. When we got to the spring, we encountered a gate with a sign on it that said authorized personnel only. No fence, just a gate, and it wasn't even locked. I'm a little confused. Oh well, that's okay. It's our last day here, and this is a good last place to visit before we have to move on. And we are done with our visit to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, and it's time to move on. We haven't added any new states to our list, and it'll be a while before we do. So it's time to hit the road, and I hope we'll see you at our next stop.